This meeting is being recorded.
Got it.
Phew.
All right. Deja vu. We will call to order the May 16th meeting of the Traffic Safety Work Group. We are meeting with Zoom via Zoom, which allows the public to participate at the meeting as an attendee. And the chair can request members of the public provide names for the purpose of keeping accurate minutes. Attendees must click the raise hand button if they wish to speak, and I'll call on you in the order they were raised. Questions should be directed through the chair. In accordance with Robert's Rules of Order, public comments will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. As a preliminary matter, I will, members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Burns.
Present.
Mr. Sylvia.
Present.
Chief Branson.
Present.
Chief Casper.
Present.
My view is, am I missing anybody? I'm sorry, I don't have, the view is a little difficult with the shared screen. I think that's everybody.
Okay.
And again, the open open meeting of the Traffic Safety Work Groups being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. Please note the meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference, and please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking and speak clearly to help generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until I yield the floor to you and state name before speaking. And finally, each vote in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. And that'll take us to, are there any questions, comments, concerns on the agenda as posted? Hearing none, we'll consider that adopted by unanimous consent. Is there any public comment for items which are not otherwise on the agenda? And I know it said click the raise hand, but also please feel free to speak up or wave a hand at me. Hearing none, we'll move on to official business. And the first item on the agenda is the safety action plan to review top intersection and corridor crash analysis prepared by Kittleson and Associates for the Nantucket Safety Action Plan, and discussion of a site visit, which I'll turn over to Transportation Planner Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to actually try to. Is this sharing okay?
It is.
Slide? I just went to full screen on that, and I do have some of the team members from our Safe Streets and Roads for All here. Is Alex on as well? Yeah, good. Mr. Chair, this is continuation from our last meeting where we shared some of the spatial analysis of crashes on the island, and what Alex and his team are going to do for this meeting is walk through some of the top crash intersections and crash corridors. And we'd like to maybe highlight some areas that we would like to schedule for a site visit with perhaps a small team of this traffic safety group, and then later this summer reconvene and discuss how those top crash locations ought to be addressed, the intersections and the corridors, and schedule those dates, and hopefully we have some volunteers that can participate in that, but we can talk about that on. But without belaboring this, I'll hand this over to Alex to run through the slides here. And again, this isn't supposed to be a huge in-depth conversation, but mostly just a look at the top locations, look at some of the improvements that have been proposed in the past, some areas that we haven't proposed improvements for that are still top priorities. And then, like I said, schedule site visits to view that later this summer. So Alex, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, welcome. Thanks for having me on this rainy little day here we're having. So with this, we're getting into, I think when I talked last to this group, we're talking more kind of global Nantucket-wide type crash patterns. And so what we're going to show here is a little bit more looking at specific sites and kind of queuing into where we see kind of two types of sites, intersections and roadways. And we treat those two as two separate locations for this conversation, in part because we want to think about what types of approaches may be appropriate, whether it's engineering or public engagement or enforcement, that makes sense for those locations, and treating them as intersections versus roadways helps us to conceptualize what approach might make the most sense. As we'll get into this, you'll see it. There's a commingling that certainly happens between those two things. And so when we get these, what we've ordered these on, sorry, oh yeah, actually, when we go to the next slide, I'll help provide, yeah. And so the way that these are ordered, you see two
Excuse me, Alex, 1 second. There's somebody, we're getting feedback. Marcia? Can you please mute? Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, Alex, go ahead.
No worries. I'm glad it wasn't me. We have a full house today, and so it's a little bit of background noise on my side too. So what you'll see here is two sets of things overlaid together. One are roadway segments and one is intersections. And they're numbered according to a weighted severity score. And how that score is calculated is for crashes that resulted in more severe outcomes get more points. So a fatal and severe or a severe injury crash gets 10 points, an injury crash gets 5 points. So it resulted in injury, and then a property damage only crash gets 1 point. And so that weighting is put together in part because we want to focus with the Vision Zero kind of concepts. Safe Street for All, really want to focus on the results that have the biggest negative outcome for people's health and safety. I know, I think with talking with Mike and you guys have some areas that specialize in property damage only crashes, where you get tight conditions where people might be bumping into each other and knocking off mirrors. And those locations may or may not show up, but the really goal here is thinking about locations that have some of the more severe outcomes. And so we walked through this list of locations with Mike the other day, and I think one of the parts we often expect in this process is there's a mix of locations that we identified that are either in the process of being treated, because you all know the locations where there are concerns, and there's locations that might be new. I think one of the things that was quite impressive, I will say, is you all may have made more progress towards addressing the more severe outcomes than any place I've ever worked with. I think when we went down the list, I think Mike, you'd identified plans or projects for like, I think 12 to 15 of the top 20 intersection locations that we had listed. And so that, in some ways, I say that not to say, like, I think with this process, you can have a mix of a goal of being able to identify the things that you weren't already thinking about, but part of it is also to reinforce, if you've already prioritized locations, having the information to be able to reinforce to the public. We know these are locations that need to be addressed because they are our locations where we have the most severe, most number of crashes. For this group and putting this information in front of it, what we partly want to also get is your kind of response to looking at the data. We are still in the process of kind of like finalizing things. And so we do, though, want to get your feedback on things that you don't see or questions you have that we can help to make sure when we're crafting a narrative for the final report, that it talks to the experiences and local knowledge that you all bring to this group. So I guess it's my effort to open it up to the crowd if there are comments. Oh yeah, and then there is a table. We have tables with actual locations too, which is helpful for those who are maybe less of a map oriented. And I believe Mike has added in the status notes for, I don't believe, he is the one who added the status notes for each of the locations on projects that are ongoing at those locations.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions on any of these?
Mr. Chair, if it's all right, I'll just expand on what Alex had presented, and here this is the list of the 20 intersections, and Alex did kind of note that there are a status on the far right hand side there. There is a hyperlink that you can go and get additional information if the membership wants to go and explore those. But I think who's kidding who? I think you're all kind of familiar with a lot of the roundabout proposals for some of these intersections, other realignments, and some work that's been done in the past, other projects that have stalled, as well as projects that, especially the Milestone Road corridor, that Mass DOT will be advertising soon and reconstructing soon. or will be initiating design on soon. Just to go at the very top, the Milestone Rotary had the highest weighted crash severity. As Alex noted, there were injuries at that intersection, property damages at the intersection, a high number of other crashes. Mass DOT has advanced the design of that project per the community's request through town meeting. And, we have shared in the past some reconfiguration schematics. And if you click the hyperlink, it'll take you to all those studies and what the imagery looks like. And just going down the line, the Noble Deer Farm Road at Milestone, that's a project that's initiating with the Milestone Rotary. Those are advancing in parallel. Number 3, Milestone at Pulpus Road intersection. You know that's being advertised this summer. We've talked about that in the past. And then we get down to the other intersections that have been studied. Perhaps they've stalled, or perhaps like with the Hummock Pond Road at Somerset Lane, the number 8 there, projects that perhaps we didn't believe that was a safety issue, and we need to maybe discuss, what were the ramifications, what led to that being such a high, have such a high severity score. I'll just scroll down to the 10 corridors. Again, I think a lot of the members here are familiar with the improvements recommended for Old South Road. That was developed as part of the Old South Road corridor study. We were unsuccessful in getting capital approval for some of those improvements, but the data shows that does have a high weighted severity, crash severity score. And then Milestone Road itself, you know that a number of years ago, Mass DOT came in and did a number of different safety improvements through that corridor to address the safety concerns along Milestone Road. And then we get to number 3, Bartlett Road. Mr. Chair, I think it would be helpful if we had maybe a couple of members take a look at some of these locations and discuss maybe some ideas that we could bring back to the larger group and discuss some improvements like Bartlett Road. There was the recent fatality. I think there's really the data shows that there's been a lot of issues with that corridor. So perhaps we can talk about some other accessibility improvements, some advanced warning that can be installed and added to the corridor to improve safety. And then, like I said, there are other corridors that may not have been on the radar, and we didn't believe that those were high or safety concerns, but perhaps they warrant a look. And that would be, say Matticat Road and some areas of Pulpus Road. Matticat Road obviously was the curvature in the road kind of led to that being a safety concern. But I think the point of this, as Alex said, was to see if there's anything not on either this corridor list or this intersection list that the group is concerned about. And I'll zoom back up to the map to get a spatial view of this. If there's anything else we should put on the table. And then, Mr. Chair, I think we'd like to maybe get a few volunteers, not a quorum of the committee, but just a few volunteers to go do site visits and then bring back some thoughts to the larger group, or discuss another way of handling maybe a site visit or coordinated meeting. So
thanks, Mr. Burns. Could you go back to the corridors list? I had a question. So on the first one for Old South, Milestone, Arrowhead, you and I have discussed this for many years. And is there any more detail on, the extent of that? I mean, is it really from, the where the bike path ends and over to Nobody a Farm, or what exactly are you trying to capture with that item?
Alex, I might lean on you to say how the crash points were kind of developed into a corridor. Art, I think, is that, Mr. Chair, is that where you're going with this? Is this was this the entire corridor identified, or can we
I'm
refine this
wondering,
down?
right, or is that meant to be the corridor from the Rotary all the way to Arrowhead to look at that entire road, or is it meant to just be I guess as I'm seeing it, I just didn't see it on a map. The way it was labeled, it looked like number 1 was just at the eastern end, but I guess is that actually meant to capture all the way to the Rotary?
Yeah, so I think the big distinction is that the roadway crash data as it's being presented here is, it is the crashes between the rotary and basically the end of the roadway that are not located at public intersections. So we evaluated the public intersections separate. So these are crashes occurring along the context of that roadway from the rotary more or less to the end of the road. That does include some, what I would consider like intersection crashes where maybe someone's pulling into a driveway. Just looking at the crashes, at the kind of the mix of crashes that are on that section of roadway, we have about a little more than a third of them are rear end, two single vehicle crashes. We have 2 bicycle involved crashes, and front to rear crashes. I mean, I would say really it's what you're seeing is probably a mix of people going fast and then people slowing down to make movements, whether to turn. And I think this is probably true for a number of the roads in Nantucket that show up in this map, where we have contexts where there's are roadways that have a series of driveways, a mix of access for whether it's people's houses or small businesses along corridors that people are able to get up to speed when there is an absence of traffic to slow them down.
Thank you. That clarifies it for me. Members, did you have anybody else have anything they wanted to add or questions on this approach and what's been presented for the intersections and the corridors, just any other areas? Are there any, I think we would be limited to 2 members of the work group. So Mr. Burns, it seems like you're really, and obviously I presume you're going to be one of them. It really limits you to just having one other person, I think, with you. If it's going to be avoid a posted meeting and a quorum and be able to have discussion. The other approach is more members could go, but it would have to be, I think, more of a informational presentation from the consultants to point out the areas, but that any substantive discussion, couldn't occur and would be limited. So those, I think, are the 2 options. Is there anybody had any thoughts on going and looking at these with Mr. Burns, either as a volunteer for one person, or who felt strongly that we should have that more than one person would like to do this? Mike, were you thinking about doing this tomorrow? Are there department team members that are on island? You had mentioned that earlier. I guess that's part of the question too, probably, is to accommodate folks' schedule.
Yes, and I'm right now I'm trying to find my the dates that we had talked about, Alex, about our site visits, and I want to say that we had picked July 25th as a site visit date. If that's available for those, and I'll also say Ian Golden has his hand up. I don't know if you wanted to recognize anyone from the public that have questions or comments.
Mr. Golden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ian Golding, I'm chair of BPAC, Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, although I think weighing in a private capacity here. And through you, Mr. Chair, if I may, to Mike.
Certainly.
And good morning, Mike. Do these statistics include bicycle accidents? I did hear a fleeting reference, but I know Tim Lepre told me on DPAC we've been trying for years to get a breakdown of all the bicycle accidents on the island and where they occur. That Tim Lepre said that there are, on average, he estimated 3 emergency room visits by injured bicyclists a day during the summer. And I wondered to what extent that anecdotal evidence is reflected in these statistics. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Certainly. Mr. Burns?
I'm actually going to lead to Alex, if that's all right.
Yeah,
And
that's fine.
Go ahead.
I'm ready to step in. Yeah. So probably 2 things. So I think 1, the data does include reported to police officers pedestrian and bike crashes. As a profession, we recognize there's likely an undercount of crashes involving people biking and walking. That kind of comes from two things. One is people who might crash their bikes, what we'll call like a single vehicle crash. You accidentally, you miss a turn, you fall down. Those are generally not reported unless unless the injury is pretty severe and police are called. But any crashes involving a pedestrian, a bike, and a motor vehicle, those are most likely are included if it's reported to the police. We do recognize that in many places those are underreported for a number of reasons. Just to give context here, but we do anything that's been reported is included in these numbers. I'm looking at the roadway corridor data. So the 10 corridors that are shown here, we have a 9 bicycle involved crashes that were on these corridors, with 8 of them occurring on Old South Road, which has 2, which we already talked about, Bartlett Road, and then Surfside Road is the one that has the largest number, as 4 bicycle involved crashes over the 5-year period that was looked at. That doesn't include intersection crashes. We also, for these corridors, see 4 pedestrian involved crashes. Our intersection crashes, the intersection, 20 locations, we are looking at a total of 13 pedestrian and bike involved crashes at the locations shown for the intersections. I don't believe there's any that have more than 2 pedestrian and bike involved crashes. Again, this is a 5-year window, 2018 to 2022. I don't believe that is the window, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I?
Yeah, go
make a
ahead.
Follow-up observation. Thank you. Through you to Chief Casper. So over the years on BPAC, we've tried to come up with a total of bike-related accidents, and we were told in the past that it's hard for the police department to provide figures because my understanding was that accidents are put into different databases depending on whether it includes bicycle on bicycle, bicycle on, falling off, or bicycle in car. Is that still, do you know if that's still the way it is? And would it be possible to actually be able to get them into a single database going forward so that it would be easier to assess where accidents are happening? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Certainly. Chief Casper, do you mind?
Sure. Yeah. So all of the accidents that involve a vehicle go into the state crash report. And that's what probably the previous chief would have said, is that we complete the state crash form, and that's only for incidents that involve vehicles. So if we have a situation with a bicyclist that crashes into anything other than a car, maybe crashes into a person or just has an accident, that would just be a report that would be on file here that is in a separate database. And there's not really a way to merge them because it's based on the state requirements for the state crash form. Unless the state changes the rules and starts having us complete, any bicycle involved accident would qualify to complete the state crash report, then we can't put that information in the state crash report. Does that make sense? That's why they're separate.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Golding, and then we are going to move on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Golding, did you have a question, or did that address it?
Well, it would be nice if we were able to find, information on all bike accidents, but I absolutely hear how Chief Casper's database is constrained.
Thank you. Back to the point of the site visit on July 25th, is there anybody that would want to accompany Mr. Burns on that? I will not be here.
So on July 25th is a date that we had talked about for the site visit. Mr. Chair, if it's just a couple of us doing the site visits, I'm curious if you'd entertain the idea of scheduling our July meeting on the 25th, and perhaps we call to order, do our site visits with minimum deliberation, and then reconvene
That's fine.
as a public meeting. I'm just trying to maximize this and understand that, you know, there are a lot of staff here. Like, you know, I should be discussing with fire and police on these site visits. And we shouldn't be constrained by open meeting laws to do our jobs. And to have that. So if we have to go by procedure and open meeting law, perhaps we just schedule a meeting instead of doing a private work group. But I don't know how you feel about that.
That's fine. We can go ahead and do that. And as long as you or someone is prepared to maintain minutes for that site visit, if it occurs in that manner. So I'd say go ahead, and then as time progresses, and that way there, your consultants and other, you know, folks that need to make arrangements can plan on that.
Well, then I should ask you, you said you wouldn't be available. Is there anyone else that would not be available on July 25th?
I'm not available on that date.
I don't believe I'm on island that date either.
You can always follow up instead of trying to work that out here, as we've got other matters to progress to. You know, we certainly can handle scheduling through via email.
Yeah, we'll do that, and I'll set up a doodle or something like this, but this is good to have the conversation and know what our strategy is going forward. So I
Perfect.
appreciate the time.
Thank you. Is there anything further on the safety action plan, Mr. Burns or Mr. Garbier? Members, any further comments? Hearing none. Thank you all very much for your work on this. And that'll move us on to item number 2. Liberty Street at Hussey Street. We have had a request for a crosswalk, and Mr. Golding is here for that. That particular crosswalk, there's a plan that Mr. Burns has just shared, is currently proposed as part of the third force main project. But my understanding, Mr. Golding, I will turn the floor over to you, is that the request is to actually modify that crosswalk to elevate it and to convert it into more of a traffic calming device. And with that, Mr. Golding, is there anything you'd like to add, or did I get that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You did. I think it would. I hope everybody got a chance to read my letter, and thank you for putting it in the package. And I think, Mr. Chairman, you've received at least 6 letters in support from Lucy Dillon at 37 Liberty, Dorothy and Sam Baker at 30 Hussey, Jack and Leslie Baldwin at 6 North Liberty, John Copenhaver and Sue Ellen Ward at 3 North Liberty, Abby Camp at 27 Lily Street, and Joanne Lawrence at 32 Lily Street. And we, even though actually, since our house is right, on the triangular lot facing Gardner and Liberty as you look up towards the monument. So by having a speed limiting raised platform sidewalk, we would bear the brunt of vehicles accelerating after they've slowed down and gone over it. We feel that that's a small sacrifice on our part if it would make the streets safer for pedestrians. And we literally see scores, if not hundreds, of pedestrians during the summer every day coming backwards and forwards in the street because, people have baby carriages, they have groups, and they don't fit on the sidewalks. And so it's a common topic amongst all my neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Golding. I had a question for you, and there's 2 crosswalks. Is your proposal only for the one to elevate only the one at Hussey Street, or the one that also crosses Liberty, for both of them?
Oh, both of them. The Liberty Street is the one where traffic really speeds through.
Sure.
The Hussey Street, people are supposed to come to a stop. And that varies before they proceed further. I'm also hoping, if I may bring up an incidental point, that along with increased signage, it would maybe reduce the number of bicyclists who go the wrong way up Hussey Street rather than going down India Street. And I think, most of the bicyclists are probably unfamiliar with the town's layout. And so it's a natural progression to go up Hussey rather than take a right down India Street. So I think it would be a great help if there was a one-way sign was affixed to the India Street signpost, along with a bicycle sign saying, this is a bicycle route, and plus a sign on Hussey Street on the stop sign saying, walk your bike. So I realize that's incidental, and thank you.
Thank you. So let's stay first. We can come back to, I think we should bifurcate the request. So, and I think that's a helpful suggestion. Let's first discuss the request for a traffic calming device or the elevated platforms, and then we can also look at, then follow that up on a discussion of signage. So what occurred to me is that, that by modifying this to be, elevated, it almost becomes more of a speed table, if you will, I believe is the language. And then there would become and I've used the verbiage traffic calming device, and that's been in past practice of our discussions, that I think that's what this would become. And there's a separate procedure for applications for traffic calming devices. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not. I thought that, you've made the formal request. We should still have this on the agenda to get the discussion out and bringing together interested parties. But my sense is that to make a modification to the roadway to create that it would be subject to the town's policy for traffic calming devices. And Mr. Burns, I'd like to defer to you on that, if you agree, or if you have some other thoughts on this.
It's really the select board's policy in order to manage the request is to go through the application process. If we I think this does warrant like a larger discussion if like we are going to handle every raised crosswalk, every speed hump, or there's a whole toolbox of traffic calming devices that can be used. Whether we would require the abutters to submit that and for the traffic report, or whether we take this on as a town initiative. I think we need a little bit of a discussion of, do we want to take this on, or should we leave this as something that we want to have be more of a grassroots effort from the neighborhood? And we do have, policies on the abutters fund such improvements. There's petitions. And all that takes some time and has some costs associated with it. I don't know if that aligns well with this, but we should probably figure out a different, whether we want to adhere to that policy and strategy, or do we want to deviate from that and perhaps have a discussion of the requirements that we want to have the neighborhood to kind of take this on, or do we want to have the town kind of look at this, and we as a group look at this and see if it actually warrants the treatment or not, and we take this on. If it does warrant it, just take this on as a public project rather than a neighborhood initiative.
Right. So what I'm hearing is, I don't think that, again, I would remind the public and applicants that the traffic safety work group is advisory only, and we're advisory to the town manager. So we don't actually have any kind of authority to be able to, grant your request. I think it's a very fair discussion to have as well as to get some feedback from the members, to the applicant and the public as to either full support, conditional support. My sense, just to lead off, would be that it would be subject to the policy. It really wouldn't be within the purview of the work group to circumvent, a policy of the select board. So, if the applicants were to follow the procedures of the policy and it was to then come back as recommended for the installation, given the parameters of the policy, then that may influence a work group member's recommendation on such an item. That being said, I think at a preliminary levels, to give the applicants a sense of whether that might be something worth pursuing or not, that we should, if anybody had any input or thoughts on this at this level, that could be helpful. And Mr. Golding, I do see your hand. Let me just go through the work group quickly, and then we will come back to you, but I certainly will recognize you for further comment and discussion on the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Work group members, any thoughts on any of that, whether we should, sort of say, really that the policy is in place and that would be the next step, and or do you have any thoughts or feelings on the proposal?
I mean, my thought is that the policy is in place, and that's obviously the purview of the select board, but in general terms, I have no issue with the proposal.
And any other members on strictly the raising of both of these crosswalks?
Mr. Chair, if it's,
Go ahead, Mr. Burns.
I don't know if I want to interrupt you or not. I think
No, please do. Go ahead.
I would say that the Liberty Street raised crosswalk would be more conducive to since it's a pass through. I would have some reservations on applying a raised intersection or raised crosswalk at an intersection or a stop approach. So that would be the concern there. It's a stop control, so you don't need a speed hump or raised crosswalk or traffic calming device there. It's a stop control. So that I wouldn't support. The Liberty crossing perhaps could. I would just question whether there's actually the speeds that would warrant that. I guess it's the eastern portion of Liberty Street, just past India Street. It necks down to where it's not 2 lanes. So you do have a natural, just with the configuration of the roadway, a traffic calming feature there. Right at that point there at the intersection of Hussey and Liberty, I'm kind of curious if we're going to have a raised intersection, speed hump, or some kind of device, if that's the proper location for it. The crosswalk is, it'd be a great feature, but if we're trying to slow traffic, perhaps an area further to the west of this intersection may warrant that. But that's going to need a little bit more of a review and maybe some information and data to kind of see if there's actually a speed problem there. So that would be my thoughts.
Thank you. Any other work group members before I turn it back to the public and the applicants? Mr. Golding?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I respectfully disagree with Mr. Burns. Mike, sorry. Since I'm talking from my study window, which faces directly up Liberty to Gardner, and Liberty turns into North Liberty or Lily Street in my other set of windows. And I see countless vehicles speed past here at considerably faster than 20 miles an hour, especially coming down Gardner Liberty, and a number of vehicles the other way don't stop. But in terms of being constrained by the width of the street, sadly, that is from my observations, and I believe from all the letters that were written about this, is not the case. So I fully take Mr. Burns' point about Hussey Street. I'm more worried about the bicyclists who go the wrong way, being hit by cars coming down. Thankfully, it hasn't happened to my knowledge yet. But a dozen bicyclists a day or more go up the wrong way there. So that was my thinking behind the raised sidewalk. But for Liberty Street, I really would hope that this would be adopted. We are opposed to speed bumps because basically when vehicles hit speed bumps, especially trucks, they really, the vibrations can be felt. We've had 5 months of vibrations from the sewer work. We've got crack monitors on our Victorian house. I don't want to have to keep them up to then show that a speed bump is actually damaging our house. The whole idea of having a wide raised sidewalk would be that vehicles would have to really slow down. And the reason why I'm before you, Mr. Chairman, is because when I brought the subject up to Drew Patnos, Drew said that the procedure was to go through you first. And so I'm absolutely happy to do whatever you direct to continue to have this being discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I think it might be a little bit of, semantics, but that, ultimately it's more of a speed table, I think, than a speed bump, is probably the way that in the traffic engineering, this would be considered. I suspect you're still going to have some, when a landscape trailer hits that, you're still going to have some noise and some rattle, or the vans with the aluminum ladders. That being said, right, I think that's going to happen with either traffic calming device. My sense is with you that a speed bump or hump might not be appropriate, but that perhaps this is a place for a so-called speed table, which would serve the the double purpose, if you will. I know I've seen them in maybe some universities and some other areas like that. And so I think that the way to proceed would be to go through the process to apply for and you've clearly got wide support within the neighborhood, which is one of the pieces of the policy for an application for a traffic calming device, and see where it goes. My sense is along the lines with Mr. Burns, I think, and from the policy that Liberty Street may work out with respect to the policy. I'm not sure how Hussey would, but because of the stop control that's there. But I think that would be the next proper step, would be to do that. I'm not trying to run you around by any means. I just think that if this work group was to make a recommendation without following the policy, the question would then be out, well, what were the results of the study from the policy? So, and if you don't have that, either Ms. Mooney or Mr. Burns or I could probably dig it up, but Ms. Mooney and Mr. Burns probably could get it to you.
If I may, that would be great, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And I don't feel that you're giving me the runaround at all. When I said speed bump, I was referring down on Lily Street. There are two, what I think are widely referred to as speed bumps. They're just sort of the asphalt is just raised, and vehicles go zooming over those all the time, which is why I was suggesting something along this nature. By being wider, it would force vehicles to really slow down. And since I was actually witnessed decades ago 2 people being killed by a speeding car, the noise of that has stayed with me for 50 years. And so I would happily trade the rattle of vehicles every day for never hearing that sound again. And thank you very much for hearing me out.
Certainly. If nobody has anything further on just and we're not done, we're gonna go back to signage, but on the aspect of the crosswalk recommendation, then we could get Mr. Golding the policy, and then it could proceed through that process.
Mr. Chair, I hear Mr. Golding's statement that he wants to avoid the speed humps, and that there needs to be, they would like some kind of treatment here. I don't honestly like to go back and maybe consider if this intersection could be raised rather than do a speed hump or speed table, and just to have the center of the intersection be raised, and then have the crosswalks just be flush with the sidewalks, and then taper down to have a curb reveal on the approaches. I don't know how that impacts drainage in the area, or with the other crossings and other areas. If it's all right, I'd almost want like another month or so to kind of maybe do a site visit with the DPW director and just take another look at this to see if there's other tools that we can use other than speed tables, speed humps, or other devices.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. I would say let's do both. In other words, there's no reason not to get the policy to Mr. Golding so that he could, decide whether to hold off or proceed with that immediately. Perhaps organize a meeting between you, Mr. Patnode, if he's available and willing, and Mr. Golding, and brainstorm. And sometimes that might be the best way, forward here, is to I always like to, say the answers are in the field, and, as we sit here, then maybe you guys come up with some ideas, and maybe that influences the policy. And I think that's actually a good segue to the signs, because likewise, I think that we're always walking a balance between signage and safety, as well as historical context and concerns with, especially in the ROH, of recommending for additional signage, which is historically of limited effectiveness in terms of adherence. But that being said, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything, right? So where's that balance in that line? Perhaps as part of that site visit, maybe Mr. Sylvia could also be involved, and you guys could look at where and recommend together, some signage might be considered, what those signs might say, and where they might be located, in a way to sort of balance the historical context and promote effectiveness, if that was okay with you, Mr. Golding.
Oh, absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. And I would look forward to being included when there's a site visit from Mr. Patnos, Mr. Burns, and whoever else might be interested.
Mr. Sylvia, who's with us, is our absolute sign guru, and I'm not completely volunteering him, but the level of institutional knowledge and expertise is incredible. So if subject to Mr. Patno's agreement and Mr. Burns, I'll defer, and you guys can work that out. Mr. Burns, that works for you?
Yeah, it does. I think we have someone else who wants to speak here. I would just tell the public to unmute yourself and jump in if the raised hand isn't working.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ms. Fader. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Oh, no. Oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, Marcia.
Hi, Lucy. I'm Marcia Fader at 36 Liberty Street. And I'm sorry, I did not get a letter in, but I am in full support of this proposal from Ian. And I just have a couple of comments to add for the record. My sense is that when you look at the drawing, there are two crosswalks being connected by what is proposed as a new sidewalk. And I would just add that as being a really important component of the design, because there's barely enough space for people when they do come from North Liberty to cross and to stand safely out of the way of the traffic. And my second comment is really just to ask for consideration for a design detail that I've observed throughout the town on crosswalks, is that I feel that it's very important not to use the same color and texture and material as the sidewalk itself on a crosswalk, that it encourages a continuous flow of pedestrian traffic rather than providing a cue for stopping before you make the cross. So that would be my only suggestion, is to consider, rather than using brick for the raised platform, to use another material. It is something that is done for accessibility on most corners, when there's a texture, a color, a different material to alert somebody to stop before you move across. And that would be my only other comment. But I do thank you, and definitely in support of the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fader. I do believe, I don't see at that level of detail in this plan, but from my observation of all the recent reconstructions, there's typically the detectable warning panels that are being incorporated into the transition from the sidewalks to the crosswalks. I expect that would also occur here. Would that be your understanding as well, Mr. Burns?
I can verify that with the DPW. I'm not really that close to these restorations that are going in after the sewers, but we can ask that of Drew.
Thanks.
I'm not specifically referring to just a panel, but the entire surface, because I think, as many of us has experienced with traffic flow in the downtown from a sidewalk across, people don't even recognize that it's not a sidewalk. It doesn't really function as a crosswalk to stop. So I'm suggesting considering a different material on the platform. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dillon?
Yes, I'm sorry I don't have my camera on.
That's okay, you're good.
Well, no, I'm actually in the hospital in Boston.
Oh.
Anyway, I went to a number of years ago, and Ian could probably tell you when. I went to the Bicycle Pedestrian Committee, two meetings in a row, and I mentioned how dangerous this intersection is. And when you walk through that intersection, you don't know which side of the street to be on. And the following, I requested then, or suggested, that people on the committee walk that intersection. When I went to the next meeting, I asked if anybody had walked that intersection, and no one had. So my suggestion is that there should be a great deal of input by those of us in the neighborhood who see the dangers of these intersections every single day. And it's not only there, it's up on the curve at Liberty Street, but something's got to be done to slow down the traffic. You may all be aware that I had a great deal of my fence taken out one year, and I also had that bicycle chained to my fence for a while, which ended up getting stolen. But anyway, so my point is that those on the committee should be walking that intersection before a final decision is made. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dillon. Anybody else on the matter? So it sounds like we'll continue, we'll carry it forward to a future meeting, and we'll defer to Mr. Burns to work with the applicant, and we'll also, Mr. Golden, get you a copy of that policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated.
Moving on to Fair Street, we have a request for two new accessible parking spaces near 58 Fair Street and 4 Fair Street. And Mr. Burns has put the one related to 58 Fair on the screen. So why don't we start with that one? Ms. McDonough, this, I believe, came through you. If you'd like to speak.
Hello, my name is Brenda McDonough, and I'm the facilitator for the Commission on Disability, and I'm here to represent the commission for this request. Usually Mr. Rowland is at the meeting, and he usually advocates for any, he usually represents the commission. But so the Commission on Disability totally advocates and supports having accessible parking spaces in residential areas. We feel it's extremely important to people that are very elderly, people that have ambulatory concerns. It's one of the components that keeps them still in their house and independent. And my office is actually at the Salt Marsh Center. And one day, Judy Lochtefeld asked me if we couldn't, she would love to have an accessible parking space across the street from her house, because even in the wintertime, that portion of Fair Street is like so congested, whether it be work trucks, whether it be people parking there so that they can just walk into town. And she and her husband are both elderly and have some disabilities. And she always finds it very difficult. Sometimes she ends up parking in the accessible parking space up by the Ship's Inn, and then takes her groceries down to 4 Fair Street. So I told her that I would definitely put a request into the traffic safety. The Lochtefelds on 4 Fair Street do not have any off-street parking. So and they have one vehicle. So this would be like the accessible parking space is not exclusively for them, because anyone with a disabled parking permit can park there, but it would give her a greater opportunity to find parking very close to her house. She and John are both in their 90s, and I think it's a reasonable request given that they're full-time residents here on Nantucket. That same morning, Mimi Jones approached me, who lives at 58 Fair Street, asking me about if she could get an accessible parking space across the street from her house. Because in the wintertime, it's not, as you can see, I took this in the winter and early spring, it's not difficult to find parking spots in the wintertime, but in the summertime, it's next to impossible. And Mimi Jones is like, she's just a lovely, lovely old woman, and she walks with a cane, and she just finds it really difficult in the summertime and she wants to be independent. And she just finds it very difficult to find a space in her area to park. And so, again, she lives here year round, and she has one vehicle and no off-street parking. And I think it's a reasonable request to put an accessible parking space in across the street from her home.
Thank you, Ms. McDonough.
Mhm.
Board work group members, why don't we take the discussion, and we'll, just because it's on the screen, let's start with 58 and then we'll move to 4. Mr. Burns, I had a question to start off. And Ms. McDonough, you may be able to answer this, or Mr. Burns. In the vicinity of number 58, along that stretch of Fair Street, or on the adjacent side roads, where are any other accessible spaces located?
May I?
Yes, please.
Thank you. The only other accessible parking space on Fair Street is the one in front of Ship's Inn, and maybe right by the Summer Street Church, which is much further down from
Sure.
58 Fair Street. I believe there's an accessible parking space, but from my knowledge, there's no other accessible parking spaces in that area.
Very good. Thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Burns, any input on this one?
Only, Mr. Chair, that, you might recall from last summer that we talked about the parking space next to the tree, and I'm kind of wondering if that's how we handle that problem space is, and I'm almost saying that in jest, but there is, through that conversation last summer about parking in this area, the southern end of Fair Street, there's really a limited supply of parking here. So that was my initial concern, is that we would just exacerbate the problem for all users. But then again, there's as Brenda mentioned, there's no accessible spaces in the area, so.
Does the, Ms. McDonough, does the applicant have a current placard?
Yes, yes, she does.
So she could park in anywhere along there, it's just a matter of the availability of the space.
Correct. In the summertime, as we all know, like with the amount of visitors that we get and the amount of people that go in, like will rent a home, there's multiple cars there. I mean, parking is so extremely limited, even on that end of Fair Street. And and Ms. Jones, she needs a place to park. She only has on-street parking. So I think when we create an accessible parking space, she lives there year round. This will be where she is going to park for the most part. And she has to park somewhere. So whether it's an accessible space or not, she's going to be parking in the street. So why not allow her the opportunity to be able to find a parking space in season that will let her live independently at home.
Thank you.
And I don't know if this is sharing, all right? Are you seeing the
is.
parking inventory? Okay, good. Again, I feel like I'm left-handed trying to navigate this. Again, I want to say the section by Fair Street and Twin Street was the two parking spaces we had discussed last year. I'm kind of curious if it's even worth considering establishing the one problem space is the accessible parking space, and since it would be, I mean, who's getting who? A very limited number of users could probably park in that space in a way that would make the property owner near Twin Street happier, and it would solve the problem of 58 Fair Street. I don't know if that would actually work or not, but just an idea I'm throwing out there, and maybe we reconvene next month to see if that's a good idea or not. And then I guess I'll ask Brent if that's worth considering. Maybe not have it at the property, but maybe a little up the street a little bit.
May I please?
Yes.
I don't want to put like Ms. Jones is very limited in her walking ability, extremely limited. She uses one or two canes. When she was leaving the Salt Marsh Center, she had two canes. One she was leaning on, and one she was pushing the automatic door button for the Salt Marsh door. She is so limited in how far she can walk. She visits the Ships Inn when her family's in town, she told me, and she has to drive down there. She can't even walk that kind of a distance. So I think putting it as close to her property as possible is the ideal solution here.
And just for reference, Mr. Chair, I want to say 58 Fair is closer to Jefferson Lane. Am I doing my bearings correct? So again, I'd like to explore this option. I just
Right,
don't
my
know.
sense is we should have you should have a look at it, perhaps, Mr. Burns, and bring back a recommendation or a slight sketch as to, just so that we're going to need that anyway, Ms. McDonough, if we're going to take this to the select board for ultimate approval. So I think that we would want to make sure that the space was clearly identified as to where it would be located, and be positioned such so as to be just one space and not negatively impact the remaining parking right there. So not opposed, just, I mean, I don't know how everybody else, but and also, it's, as much as I'm sympathetic to Ms. Jones, it is also that any user in the area, that there's really just not another accessible space in this area. I think we have to be careful to look at this too from there may be other folks with needs, and since there's not an accessible space, where might be the most efficient and ideal location to serve that area of Fair Street, as well as Ms. Jones. So if it's all right, I think and I welcome any other comment from work group members, and Mr. Burns could have a look, maybe do a sketch as to his recommendation for the positioning of that space, and then that would set us up, if there was a positive recommendation next month, for it to go to the select board.
May I?
Yes.
I appreciate what you're saying and I understand. My concern is that summertime is just right around the corner. And so then next month is June, and then it has to be brought to the select board.
That's
And
the
then,
pro.
pardon me?
That's the process. I mean, the timing kind of is, I understand that, but at the same time, I don't think that, again, as an advisory group, we really want to make sure that we're bringing forth a clear and concise application and recommendation to the select board.
Yep. Yes, I
Right
totally
now,
understand.
right now, it's just kind of saying, well, let's put an accessible space there, but where is that? Should I probably have some photos of because you have photos of the house, but so that it's very clear to the select board, to the DPW who are gonna have to demarcate it. Let's just get it all, I think, and I'm not trying to put you off past the summer of the months, but that would be my recommendation, is to just not leave it to question or uncertainty, or have these discussions come up at the select board level, or all of a sudden, that happens there, and other neighbors, I'm not going to be surprised, might not favor this, and come out at the time that that's being considered to perhaps oppose the request, because then it's a space they don't get to use. So the more solid the information this is based on, I think, would ultimately benefit the applicant.
Thank you.
Is not hearing any further discussion on that. And I will just add, I mean, the other option, of course, and I suspect you might want to do it, but I mean, I'm just looking at the aerial, is an off-street space something that she's considered as well. So I don't want to sidetrack the whole discussion, but you might be prepared for that to come up as well on her own property. So with that, let's move on to 4 Fair Street. And this request, just so we're clear, Ms. McDonough, would be to make the westerly or the northerly most location, the position of the Jeep, to be the accessible spot. So from the gate to the land bank back.
Yeah, where the blue, the blue SUV is parked, that's what we're requesting to be the accessible parking space.
Why not where the Jeep is, so that you don't have the accessible space in the middle of the row of?
Well, there's a driveway right before that, and we just thought it would be easier for people just to pull in versus going, we just thought it would be easier. Now, if
I see your point.
Yeah, that's where they're coming down Fair Street, we just thought it'd be easier for them to pull in right there than to go into the space closer to Main Street. But if traffic safety feels that the first parking space is the best positioning for the accessible parking space, we support that.
Yeah, I mean, I see your point on the straight pull in, but I also could see that if it was to be the one closest to Main Street, it could be viewed as servicing the park and Main Street, and it ties in more towards accessibility to folks that might park as users of the town, as well as the nearby abutters that have a need. And the other piece would be whether or not, I think it would be fair for the work group to consider, it's a longer yellow line there, whether that space actually would go one space further towards Main Street, where there currently is a yellow line. Though I will tell you that that was added some years ago at the request, I believe, of the land bank, so that there wasn't parking directly in front of that entrance to the Fair Street Park. So I just put that out there for, complete discussion on the matter. Either, I think, support for either one of these spaces as an accessible space, removal of a yellow line, and as an accessible space to the north of the Jeep. And I'd open that up for discussion from the work group. Anybody? Um,
Mr. Chair,
yeah, Mr. Burns, do you have a?
I'm just gonna
I know you
scroll
have
up to the,
comment from the public that we'll take as well.
yeah, I think we have the same kind of issue with 58, to where there's just not a lot of accessible parking space in the general area. There's high demand for parking in this area in general. My initial thought was to perhaps talk with the land bank staff. I know when that parking was removed to the gate, I want to say there was some discussion about the need for accessible parking in this area. So this might be something that the land bank might support as well. But which space, the northern space or the southern space at this location? I don't know if I have a strong feeling one way or another. I kind of want to lean to what would be more convenient for the users of the space.
Mr. Lowell.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Mike, for everything you're doing. I'm really familiar with this little spot. I actually went back down there this morning and looked at this, and those same vehicles in the picture are actually there now, which is amazing. I couldn't believe it. So this spot, and I want to chime in on what Art said about the yellow line after I say this first part, is this is a little bit of a wider section of Fair, and the curbing is low. So it's easy to pop up onto the sidewalk to park. It's easy to sort of, if you're in a peculiar little position to have to back up a little, it isn't as difficult as other spots. What was mentioned about the driveway behind the blue Subaru is correct, or Kia or whatever that is, and that is actually a great idea to just pull right in. But overall, I think there should be a conversation with the land bank again about maybe extending the parking back at least half of what it used to be prior to the park, because the park has two entrances. You have the entrance on Main and the entrance at Fair, and it's not like there's like an army of people, going in and out of here all day. And you could make the case that the sidewalk is impeded just with the vehicles parked there, regardless of the park being there. So this spot is a lot different than 58 is, in my opinion. I'm just giving you my thoughts on this as a person that is kind of an advocate for improving parking, fixing little problems. This is a spot that needs to be re-examined, in my opinion. We could pick up the handicap space and add a conventional space at the same time, in my opinion, in this spot. So that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. Mr. Burns, is this something you think that, since you're going to be looking on Fair Street, we look at this one as well? And like you said, maybe a discussion, if, we would not want to, I don't think, make a recommendation and then have the land bank, it would be better to involve them and understand what, how, strongly they feel. I wonder, Mr. Lowell's point, if we were to pick up half of a space, would that result in enough space, depending on if it's, Jeeps versus F-150s, parked there, that you could, maybe, and keeping the ADA space on the end, might it work out that there was, a bit of a gain there, if you would. And I think that if the ADA space was, towards the gate, it might make sense. It leads right down to the crosswalk that you're showing, which is, at grade, and folks would give them access to Main Street as well.
I want to make sure I can absolutely make this part of the site visit and the review. I just wanted to maybe make sure that I understand what the appetite is for adding parking here. Is the idea that perhaps the space between the gate and with Main Street, perhaps you could add the accessible space in that location and talk with the land bank about whether that would ruin the view of the park or any type of other aesthetic reason? Was that part of the evaluation, is whether we want to add a space to this rather than repurposing a space?
I'll just open it up for everybody, but my thought was to simply remove a piece of the yellow line that would go in front of the gate because the sidewalk is wider there and people could still get in and out. But perhaps it's, as you, maybe it's more palatable to keep a yellow line in front of the gate there and then have it so there was one ADA space that's right where you show in the drawing. I think that should be explored to see which might be the, you know, we're balancing, I think, a lot of things here. And, you know, before we make a recommendation on this, I think due diligence would be to, you know, sort of do a little bit of work to see what options might exist. Not have these all come up then at a select board level, fresh, if you will. Mr. Lowell?
Yeah, just one more thought, since Mike has his drone thing here, which I not used to this. This is good, Mike. So I took a measurement this morning. You look at that white car from the curb to the east to that car is 12 feet. I couldn't believe it.
It's a lot.
It's pretty wide. And so I was saying earlier, this part of the street is different. And I thought about something else. I didn't even want to bring it up, but you kind of made me think of, well, maybe this is a good idea. Not to make this more complicated, but to make it more of an improvement overall of this area that really should have parking, as well as the aesthetics of the park and all that, is maybe have some bollards or something to create a way the vehicles don't pull too far on the curb, because they don't really have to. I know that's a whole nother conversation. You got to get historic commission involved and all that kind of stuff for something like this in that area. But I'm just saying, I don't see an issue with the request, as it's just stands it on its own in that spot where the Subaru was. But this area has other issues that could be improved as well. That's a lot different than the other application. Thanks, Mike, for the view. Thank you.
And to that point, maybe, you know, bollards instead, it would of course probably be hitching posts or, but what about those bike rack, you know, just again, kicking out ideas, the stanchion type ones. I don't know, maybe the sidewalk's just not wide enough for that. It would create more interference, but I think it's worth looking at really the corridor from the driveway to the White House. I'm not sure what number that is, to Main Street, in context of this request, and then having a discussion also, you know, with the land bank staff and looking at it, and, you know, and then coming back with a staff recommendation for the next meeting.
May I say something, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please, Ms. Mooney.
When you were talking about creating another space, whether it's in front of the entrance to the land bank park or in front of it, the problem, I think one reason why that yellow line extends to where it is now is because the Fair Street entrance is the accessible entrance to the park.
Right.
So if you put a parking space either in front of the accessible entrance or at the accessible entrance or more towards Main Street, one of the problems is that vehicles park on the sidewalk. And so therefore they block access, any wheelchair access or even pedestrian access to the park. So I think that has to be considered also, that, you know, you have to keep that area of the sidewalk clear of vehicles so that they have access to the park.
Yeah, that goes back to that discussion we've had maybe a decade or so ago. I mean, that was why I think this was done. I mean, maybe on this one, I know we've gone around on it a little bit, but maybe it's just that where the white car is in this particular photo becomes the accessible spot. I think we could probably presume the position of the land bank staff as well, if we were to bring that. And then here we have the Commission on Disability giving feedback that they would actually, sounds like, have legitimate concerns with what we've just. But this is the process, I think, having a discussion like this for something like this. And maybe we should at this point just on this one. Maybe it's just to recommend the ADA, excuse me, the accessible space at one of these two locations. So anybody have any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Thank you for reminding me of that, Brenda. You're absolutely right.
She is. I didn't think
uh,
of that.
So yeah, and now that I look at probably the white vehicle there is probably the ideal spot for the accessible space. So we can hold this over for next month, Mr. Chair, if you want to finalize this and allow some coordination with Land Bank, or we could, I'm happy to make a recommendation now that we.
I think you could make a motion if you were willing on that.
I'd make a motion to designate the space at the end of Fair Street to, by the parking gate to be repurposed as an accessible space.
Any further discussion on them, or is there a second on the motion? A second on the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Burns, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chief Granson?
Aye.
I believe Chief Casper just stepped out and had to leave early for another meeting. Mr. Sylvia?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. So, okay, Ms. McDonough, we'll bring that one forth and then we'll work on the other one.
I thank you so much. I think you guys have
Certainly.
done such a tremendous job.
Thank you. And that'll move us on to Gardner Street to review the request to convert the traffic flow from two-way to one-way. And as I think all of you know, this goes back several years of discussions, and it's a really tough situation, I think, here. But Mr. Burns, you want to cue this one up?
I can. This is a request from town administration for us to have another discussion of this. Last time we talked about this last summer, there was really not an appetite to consider an evaluation of making this one way. If there is a desire to take a look at this, this is going to be something I would need to. It's a heavier study. It's a bigger lift than just using existing data that we have available. So if you think it warrants additional evaluation, we can turn this into a project and try to do a study of this area to see what the ramifications of being one way would be, and to come up with more of a schematic drawing than what the sketches I have right now. I had wanted, if I was going to spend any type of time and funding on this, to have some support of a one way. And it just didn't seem like we had that the last time we discussed this. So I just didn't really progress the work very much, since there was really no appetite for it at all. So the original recommendation was to have it be one way. What seemed to work from a, and again, Chief Cranston's here, from a public safety standpoint, was having access going northbound into town from this location, so that there would be additional emergency response from the fairgrounds area, Mid-Island, to downtown, and then repurposing the southbound lane to a more of a bike lane. And that would be the configuration, that if it was to be one way to accommodate all users, bikes, pedestrians, and the one-way traffic flow going into town. As far as the volumes, it's really split. Obviously, there's a higher demand in the morning to go northbound. In the evening time, employees in the area leave, or those patrons in town leave. So the flow reverses. So it's really a 50-50 split of north and southbound. It's just what time of day is the dominant flow. So if this was made one-way northbound, the southbound traffic would be deviated to some other area which would need to be evaluated. It's either Main Street, Orange Street, or the Liberty area to go around town. And so if there's an appetite to do more of an intense evaluation of this, I'd almost ask for direction from the work group to spend time on this as requested by town administration.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. I think where we started this meeting in discussions about concerns with speed. While I understand there's a lot of conflict on this road, and that it's very tight, and it does result in slower speeds through that corridor. And if you make it one way and more breathing room, I think you're gonna solve one problem and create another, with respect to speed, as well as congestion in other areas. I've said my part on that. That's just how I feel about it, but I welcome other discussion on the matter. I think it's, part of could you look at moving the, putting the poles underground as we talked about for years, really fixing sidewalks better. And maybe it's on one side. I think there's a lot to that, but my sense is just going to one way is gonna, compound a speeding situation and a congestion situation, but that's just my thoughts. Work group members, anybody else have thoughts on this? I do see that we have neighbors here who are very, very familiar with the area. Welcome any input or thoughts if you wish. Mr. Golding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're absolutely right. It did actually, Mike, refresh my memory if I'm wrong, but it came up for BPAC in April and May of 2018. And a number of abutters were very strongly opposed to it for precisely the reasons that you've mentioned. And I don't believe anything has changed. BPAC in May did not take a vote on it because it was clear that there was a lot of opposition. That included the Woodbury Lane Owners Association, who chimed in at that meeting. So thank you for letting me put in my 2 cents.
Certainly, Mr. Golding. It's always very helpful to have, sort of the on the ground, input from folks that live and breathe the particular areas. Mr. Lowell.
Hey, thank you again. Finally got to this. This has been coming up for years, and it stays the same because there isn't a perfect solution to this, and the perfect solution is not the right thing for Nantucket as far as a historic street like this. However, there are answers to make it better, safer, and still keep its tradition. So I brought up something at the real estate committee meeting the other day about possibly having a project to look at the pole moving, as they're doing in other places in historic towns that have poles in the middle of sidewalks like we do. Eventually that has to get looked at. If they can't go underground for reasons that are beyond our understanding, with huge concrete vaults and all these other things that have to be done, the pole in front of the Kagan house is in the right location. And it's the only one I think that actually is. Maybe there's one more. And it just happens to be put there, probably before the first car got here. It just happened to get put in the right spot. With the work that's going on with the sewer that's going up to Liberty, I think what should happen, and I think there is a plan for this, to lower the curbing to a height that is safe for bicycle pedals not hitting the curb, for cars to be able to traverse up and down off the sidewalk safely, and keep the traditional width and the sidewalks the way they are, because they're not that wide. And if you shrunk the sidewalk like we did on South Beach Street, Mr. Chairman, which you're very familiar with, I think it was 22 inches, it made a huge difference. But you can't tell the sidewalk got made smaller. That wouldn't work here. It would take away a significant amount of the sidewalk. And I don't live here, obviously, in the street, but I certainly understand the street as good as any person that lives here. And this is a tough one. There isn't a perfect answer. This is like India Street two-way. You gotta be able to ride on the sidewalk to some level, or you're just fighting against your own, wishes. So I think this should be a combination of small improvements with the curb and resetting the bricks after the sewer project, lowering the curb or raising the street, however that ends up working, and possibly removing the sign in front of number 109 that kind of doesn't need to be there. That's actually the worst spot for getting past, and there's a sign there that makes it even more difficult because it's right across from a pole. That was put in probably 20 years ago. So that would be my suggestion. We have to put this one to bed a little bit as far as the idea of making it one way, because the fire and police are never going to agree to that anyway, and it would cause a huge disruption in the access in and out that spreads itself out naturally as it currently exists. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having me.
Certainly, Mr. Lowell, thank you as always for your input. I'm curious, and I don't want to detract or sidetrack from what you said, but where is the sign? And that, you know, again, if out of these discussions we ever can even make small improvements, I gotta see it as, you know, everybody's kind of heads it together and that's it. And recommendations, perhaps there's at least something that helps that comes out of this. I'm trying to bring it up. I think Mr. Burns, maybe we're doing that too.
There's a sign right next to 109 Main. I believe it's 109.
Feel free to grab the screen, Mr. Chair, if you.
No,
I'm
likewise.
trying.
I am too. 109. So
There's
right.
a no parking sign, which is fairly obvious that there's no parking on Gardner.
Mr. Sylvia, are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the sign, and I can probably talk about the discussion that led to that. That was a traffic safety recommendation based on an abutter who just really didn't like. I mean, that Nat mentioned that was a very a troublesome spot. Well, I mean, that it was very attractive for vehicles just to pull up in front of the front door, and I was very green right out of college when that got approved, and that was the reason, was to just limit the ability to drive up on the sidewalk at that location, because the property owner felt overly burdened, and it was agreed that that would be the solution, instead of a bollard, to put a no parking sign up to serve as a bollard.
I'd like to say something.
Go ahead, Ms. Dillon.
Yes, as you know, I live on the corner of Liberty and Gardner, and the curb there is high. I would like to point out that if that curb is lowered, the town will be responsible for flooding out my basement and the basements of two of my neighbors. And I don't think that they want to go that route. Those curbs, when we get those torrential rains that come down very quickly, those curbs are just high enough to prevent flooding in those houses from the corner of Liberty south, or excuse me, north. And when it was last repaved, the paver refused to raise the street height. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dillon.
Okay, so it's the next house.
This isn't the sign you were talking about?
Yeah, that's the sign. It's not at
Lowell?
109. I thought it was down further,
Gotcha.
but yeah.
Okay.
That is it.
So I guess, you know, that raises a good point right there. Is it something that, you know, should this road, I know it might seem obvious, but as we know, we've got folks from all over, you know, should there in fact be yellow lines on both sides of this road? And then get rid of the sign? If we don't have the sign there, someone's gonna park there and then say, and the police are gonna have trouble with enforcement. Like, you can't.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, not that there was parking on the street, it's just that that's a pull off to let someone pass. And the idea was to not have that be a desirable pull off.
Yeah,
So
but
everybody can have one.
no, but I mean, I don't know.
If I could,
Yeah,
Mr.
go ahead,
Chair,
Ms. Lowell.
I don't want to, so what Lucy said is correct, and I don't want her to think I want the sidewalk flush to the street. That is not at all my point. So in her spot actually is the best spot because it was fixed, or, you know, like nicely there. And her spot is the way it sits now. You can drive up a little bit when you need someone to come up to on the Kagan side, but the Kagan side is the one that is worse. That's the side that, so in other words, my point is, if we can fix the curbing to work at least on one side that doesn't affect the water, the only curbing only has to go down to about 2-inch reveal. So there's going to be plenty of guidance for water. It will help allow for those natural pull-offs. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this street is functioning as a dirt road with with turnouts. I mean, it is.
Mhm.
And that's the way this road operates. And it's, I mean, there isn't a perfect solution, but the curbing height is definitely a solution to the issue of being able to pull off a little bit. And then, of course, the poles is a whole nother animal, and it was the hardest thing to do, is to move a telephone pole. So
All right,
anyway, so
right.
that's all.
I think we had, you know, at this point, the proverbial, you know, snowball or pulling on the string of the ball of yarn here, and the request really was to address the
One-way.
traffic flow. And I think that given we're only on item 4 after an hour and a half of our meeting, we have a few more items. The consensus seemed to me to be, and tell me if I'm wrong, work group members, not to request converting the traffic flow from 2-way to 1-way. Am I correct on that? Does anybody feel differently? Yeah, go ahead.
Was the question to do more of a more elaborate evaluation? I just, that when we talked about this last summer, there just didn't seem to be an appetite to even think about it.
Likewise, I mean, we don't want to, you've got a lot on your plate. And, you know, if there's really not a sort of, you know, that this is a whole can of worms, if you will, of all of the projects going on, and the request was really related to the, you know, to the traffic flow. And if there's really not a consensus to support that, then I think we probably could end this at that point and
Yeah.
move on.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one quick question. That traffic flow chart, what time of year was that done?
Mr. Burns.
Don't remember.
And Mr. I
Do
would-
I have, I'd have to go verify that. I want to say this was taken during maybe not in August, but in the summer season.
All right, maybe Ms. Vader, you could follow up, but I'm not trying to cut anybody off, but we do have to efficiently run these meetings, and we're starting, I think, to get a bit, you know, off topic, and we're only halfway through our agenda. So, anyway, I think it's time to move on this topic if no work group members have anything further.
Yeah, I only wanted to comment and agree and let you know that I would not want to see it become a one-way street. And I also feel that it's not worthy of a study. But I would say that since as of yesterday, it's been paved and the sidewalks are also asphalted, as you know, this is going to be quite temporary, but probably for at least 6 months to 10 months. I don't know when they'll be back. It would be a potential time for just simply monitoring what is going to happen with essentially no defined sidewalks except with a slight berm, because right now, going forward through the next year until the sidewalks are reconstructed, we essentially have a much, much wider road. But we also have many of us who live here year round who have experienced 5 months of finding alternate routes, because I think all of you know we've not been able to drive through here.
Right.
So alternate routes do work for people for 5 months now. And I especially
Ms. Vader, I appreciate the comments. I really think I thank you for adding that. And I think that we're on the same page sort of at this point, that, you know, keep an eye on it, but there's really not support to change really anything. And I don't really sense that we want to get into even the sign at this point. We were asked to look at the one-way flow, and there's clearly not support from the neighborhood or the board. So unless there's anything further, I do think that we need to progress through our agenda. Thank you all for your input on that. Any further work group members? Okay.
I think there's consensus for no action.
Thank you. Washington Street Extension to review a request for traffic calming devices. So Mr. Burns, this is the policy, Mr. Golding. I see that you're still on, and just to, we'll get you this form, but this is what I was referring to. And so, Great Harbor Yacht Club went through, or their representative, went through the process here. And Mr. Burns, you want to run us through the application?
Sure. There's just the application that was submitted that we have for meeting material down in Washington Street Extension, and it'd probably be good to maybe go to a street level view here. What was being asked for was a speed hump in the vicinity of an existing crosswalk, and I believe this is the location behind me. Here, the request was to have a speed hump before and after this crosswalk. And I was thinking perhaps this needed to be a raised intersection like what Mr. Golding had recommended for or requested for the Liberty Hussey Street area. I think a raised crosswalk in this area might be a little bit better than the speed hump before and after. Again, does it warrant a traffic calming device? I think was the intent of the check and the application was to just collect data on this area, and just see if it warrants my suggestion would be to think about more of a raised crosswalk at this location instead of the speed humps. And if there's desire to do some data collection there, I'll try to get that into a queue. But it's starting to pile up a little bit, and this might be something we discuss more in September or October, if that's going to be all right.
Well, I think if he filed the application, I think that it would be incumbent upon us to set out the counter as you're able, and doesn't have to be immediately, but ideally it would capture the July or August traffic counts. And then we could take it up from there, and then, perhaps based upon that information, our recommendation may be different than his proposal, and it may also be acceptable to him. But I think at this point, right, it's just a next process in the policy is the data collection as you're able, if I understand right.
Yeah, and I will say I do have a traffic counting program that we do have new traffic counters we're trying to deploy and try to understand the remote traffic. So I will try to put this into a queue. I don't want to rant about just being burdened with.
No, that's what I mean. I think that part of it, if I may, it's not even that. It's that ideally, this is May, and if you did it in July or August, if that fit, that might make the most sense. As your schedule permits, I think that would be fair, and I think it would also, be good form to reach out to Mr. Creasy and let him know that.
Could do that, and it might be worthwhile, Mr. Chair, since these are starting to pile up, these traffic calming devices applications, which I don't think was the intent when this policy was first established, that we would get just overwhelmed with this. Perhaps we sub this out to a private traffic counting company.
I'll defer that to you.
And maybe that's the way we handle it, and then have their application price actually reflect the cost of actually having a company come over here and do the counts that we need.
I think that would have to be between probably you and the senior planner and the town manager, I would think.
I would think town administration, since they administer the applications and set the fees and.
Very good. Okay. Well, if you could let Mr. Creasy know that, as you know, that we're investigating it and you've received his application, and then we'll take it up when you're ready.
Sure.
Thank you. And then on Straight Wharf, we have a review request for 2 additional taxi spaces.
And I don't believe we have a map of those locations, but, and the police chief isn't here to, I guess, describe the request, but I believe from the notes was that they were requesting 2 taxi spaces be created at Straight Wharf. And I will see if I have the map here.
So. So
It
there's,
looks like,
the 4 represents the taxi spaces now, right?
I believe so.
It's my sense of down there. Is there any support for the application to, it looks like increase that to 6 and decrease the public parking along there?
Mr. Chair, just expedite things. I'd make a motion not to take no action.
That's fine. I don't know if we even need it. So if there's no motion for action as well, I think that there would be a consensus of no action on this item. And with that, brings us to Vestal Street to look at a request to remove on-street parking. Mr. Burns.
I'm going to yield to Mr. Sylvia. I believe this is his request.
Go ahead, Mr. Sylvia.
Well, no, I just went up there. David Gray from the sewer department had asked me to see what I had for maps for yellow lines for this street, and it's kind of always been kind of the Wild West on the Quaker end. On the Vestal Street end, I don't actually have the measurement, but I know from Milk Street, at least up to past that corner where the one spot is very narrow. Even that one spot, that's probably the first spot you could get. There used to be spots actually around the corner on that narrow section, just past the curve. It's very dangerous there. I'm sure the fire chief would have some issues getting some apparatus through there. When I pulled out from Bloom, there was a vehicle parked across the street on each side. There's a fire hydrant there that's going to need a new yellow line. Was thinking about extending that. I was thinking not really like from Bloom Street towards Quaker. There are some areas, especially where it gets wider, where you can have parking. What was happening though is the driveways are across the street, so people were having trouble getting in and out of their driveways. So it's a weird situation. It's never actually been properly marked, and like I said, I would think from Bloom Street down there might be that one spot that he has the white box, but after that, it's really sketchy on the width. Going Bloom Street towards Quaker, I'm assuming we could probably there would be a lot of parking spots, especially where it widens out or where it narrows out, maybe by the old jail. It starts to get a little spotty because you got driveways on both sides of the road. And if you have parking on both sides, which is pretty much what they've had, again, fire chief would have a lot of problems getting a truck through there, especially in the summer. So I understand we could probably mark the Quaker end a little differently than the Milk Street end from Bloom down. So.
So is this the recommendation, Mr. Sylvia, to make this as shown on the graphic?
No, Mike came up with this. I wasn't sure. Like, I think me and him just had a quick discussion about it. It was like like I talked to him the other day, and it was like this was the starting point. So I think there could be yellow lines for the driveways down on the wider section towards Quaker. There would be, so you're not taking away any parking really. When you start getting up towards the old jail, it starts to get narrower. When you get up to Bloom Street, it's pretty bad. That one spot there where the white box is really doesn't cause too much of an issue. But by talking to a couple of the property owners in that area when we were up there looking at it, even that one is kind of creates an issue once in a while, but it's not as bad as the lower Vestal towards Milk Street and around the Bloom Street, because that fire hydrant, I've seen cars parked in front of that, and that's directly across from Bloom Street. You can't even turn out of there if somebody's parked there. like I said, I wouldn't say no parking either side the whole way. I would definitely say from that white box down to Milk Street, and then I would say there's got to be a section where it's one side, maybe down to the old jail, and then the rest of it where it widens. You know, it might get a little technical in there, but I know people wouldn't want to lose the parking in here, but it's also, you know, you can't block driveways either.
I think, if I may, that what we need, is a, graphic that shows proposed yellow line locations. So if you could take just this graphic, field edit it to think where, where you would suggest the yellow lines could go, which then the, the inverse of that would be where parking would be allowed, the 1, 2, 3, whatever it might be, that won't interfere with getting out of driveways on the opposite sides. I'm looking at an aerial right now and I could see where a couple cars are parked. I could see where if cars were parked there, coming out of Bloom Street could be a problem. So if possible, and I don't know if this is through you or through Mr. Burns, as you're able, I think that just to refine this with a suggestion for the proposed, and then that would set forth something that's nice and easy, or clear, let's call anything easy, clear going forward for where you'll lay out the yellow lines. And then once you have that based on your first, look at it, then that would give the fire chief and police an opportunity to review what you've come up with as a suggestion, to see if they had any concerns from an access. And my guess is there's probably you guys would probably be pretty close to in line there. Does that work for everybody?
That works for me.
Mr. Burns, that makes sense?
It does. So just be clear, I guess we're gonna table this for about a month. I'll huddle
Yeah, or
with DPW to
two.
come up with a graphic to show where parking could be
Yeah,
permitted.
do it, walk it,
Hmm.
kind of use the aerial, the driveways, and just do a sketch that's very similar to what you have, except it adds the the proposed yellow lines, and then by default, that would be, the opposite would be where there might be able to be some parking. Mr. Sylvia?
Yeah, the other thing too is also, we've never really had a concrete regulation on how wide the road would be for, I would say, I'm gonna pick the Bloom Street towards the old jail, for driveways that are on the opposite side of the road to have a yellow line on the other side of the road in order for them to get in and out of the driveway. We never had an actual like width of the road, which would, I don't know what that would be.
I think every site's a little different because sometimes your driveways are a little bit of an acute angle. Sometimes the driveway itself is slightly wider so that somebody doesn't have to make as wide of a turn to the opposite side to swing in there. So I don't know that a blanket regulation where I think we have to, especially in these, congested and historic district, we're trying to balance the maximizing the parking without making it so somebody can't navigate in and out of their driveway. So I think it has to be on a case by case, scenario. And it's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to be the easiest, maneuver, but we also shouldn't expect somebody to be, a professional fire truck or truck driver to get in and out of a driveway. So I think it's again back to the answers in the field and trying to what your feel for, what would work there, I think would be a good starting point personally. All right, so it sounds like we will, I'll also table that one for further study. And then 25 North Water, we had to review a request for on-street parking across from the driveway and possible changes. Mr. Burns.
Yeah, the DPW director would probably be the best person to speak on this issue. There was an issue with being able to get in and out of a driveway. It's this location here where the utility pole is. I believe the ask was to eliminate parking along the opposite side of the road for some distance so that it may be easier to back into the space. And I want to say there was a request to reconfigure the driveway apron as well here, like to have excuse me, pardon me while I'm clumsily navigating through this, reconfigure the driveway, which, again, I don't know if I'm fully clear on that, but it might be something we want to table and discuss at a future meeting when Drew can better describe what he's thinking here.
Right, I think we would need some plans for that, because I could see this happening, this whole corridor.
Yeah.
If we, it's gotta really, I think I agree, let's hold that over if everybody agrees. And, with that, is there any other business or future suggested agenda items from any members? Mr. Burns?
Do we still plan on meeting in June? I guess June 20th will be our next meeting.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
All right, has been made. Mr. Burns, how do you vote?
Aye.
Sylvia?
Aye.
Chief Granson?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.